Hi, everybody. I recently returned from a trip to China where I was invited by the Chinese government to look at some technological advancements that they've made in China, as well as to discuss the Canada-China relationship with officials at the Foreign Ministry. Upon returning, I did this really excellent webinar that was hosted by the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, as well as the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, with the support of Just Peace Advocates. It's a really interesting discussion that I want to share with you on the podcast today about some of the lessons learned from China, some of the experiences I had, and what Canada can do to build a more peaceful and productive relationship with China going forward.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brendan Stone. I'm the co-chair of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, which is the organization that's sponsoring today's event. It's also being endorsed by the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Networks. There's a lot that could be said about today's event. This event, as you can see from the poster that's being shared on the screen, is Alex Tyrrell reporting back from China. He wanted to learn about what's going on in China right now, all of the developments, but also how to de-escalate tensions between China, Canada, and the West. Something that's very important as we see in that part of the world. There's a lot of tensions. We want to have better relations with China and other countries in the world, especially thanks to Trump's trade war and the threats to annex Canada. The interest in China and trade and partnership is greater in Canada than it ever has been. As an anti-war organization, we in the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War have always promoted mutual respect with China, especially at a time when there is so much hostile talk that you can find. So it's very important to get a perspective into China, inside China. And for that reason, many of us are glad that Alex went on this trip. So let's move over to our special featured speaker, Alex Tyrell, the leader of the Green Party of Quebec since 2013. I'll give a bit of background on him. The year before becoming the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, Alex was already a veteran of the Maple Springs student movement, which had been so exciting and inspirational across that province. Following his secondary education, Alex Tyrell enrolled in the Mechanical Engineering Technology program at Montreal's Dawson's College, and during his technical studies at CEGEP, he worked on the issues of biofuels and became involved in an advocacy program to finance a project of the design of electric vehicles for the students of his department, something you'll be hearing about, a topic you'll be hearing about in the meeting today. He graduated from an environmental science program at Concordia University in Montreal in 2017, having focused his studies on better understanding the problems of pollution, the impacts of climate change, and issues related to the environment. And during the past decade or more, Alex has had an exciting time promoting various issues and campaigns within the Green Party and beyond. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring you Alex Tyrell. I'll pin him on the screen, and he has a lot to report back.
Well, thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you to the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, as well as Just Peace Advocates. It's really an honor for me to be able to share the insights that I've learned through this 2-week trip to China. And so as Brendan presented a bit about my background, about my education and sort of where I'm coming from on that sense. Since 2013, I've been leading the Green Party of Quebec. I was elected to that position at the age of 25. And the Green Party of Quebec has really defined ourselves as an eco-socialist party that fights against issues including racism and discrimination within Quebec and Canadian society. I'm also involved with the Québécois Movement for Peace, which is an anti-imperialist organization situated here in Montreal. And over the past few years, I've been quite deeply involved with the peace movement, especially in response to the NATO proxy war that's taking place in Ukraine. And so through my involvement in the Green Party of Quebec, I've had the opportunity to take positions on various issues impacting minority communities here in Quebec. One of the first issues that came up back in 2013 was the Charter of Quebec Values, which sought to ban all religious symbols from all government employees. That was something that we took a very strong position against. And it's enabled us to build a relationship with the Muslim community here in Quebec. Also, I come from an Anglophone father and a Francophone mother. But there is issues of discrimination based on language here in Quebec, and so we've been very vocal on those issues, defending the Black community as well, and issues like Black Lives Matter, and marching for various causes, including that one. We've worked with the Jewish community as well about the bans of religious symbols, including the kippah, and more recently I came onto the issue of anti-Chinese racism, especially as it pertains to Canadian politics. Last year, I started a series on my podcast called The Eco Mindset that was addressing the issues of anti-Semitism in Canada. And of course, Canada has a very long history of anti-Chinese racism. The National Railroad in Canada was built to a large extent by Chinese labor, people who were brought to Canada and who were forced to pay what they called a head tax. So basically, laborers that would come here and that would start off owing a large sum of money to the government. That went on for a certain amount of time, and then in the 20s, there was called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which essentially banned all immigration in Canada, despite the remarkable contributions that Chinese immigrants had in building the National Railway, which is something that really sort of defined Canada as a country and allowed us to do all sorts of development. So one of the latest issues about anti-Chinese racism in Canada is this hysteria that we see around alleged Chinese interference in Canadian elections. And what really struck me about that issue is that when you look into what the specific allegations are, they are often very, very marginal things. Like, for example, somebody with a Mandarin accent asking a question in a debate about Canada-China relations, for example, or people criticizing certain politicians in Canada who are anti-China on applications like WeChat, which is popular with a lot of Chinese people and a lot of Chinese Canadians. So I really perceive this anti-Chinese interference narrative as really unsubstantiated allegations that are really kind of leaked by CSIS and the RCMP to build up animosity towards the Chinese government, and perhaps even to prepare Canadians for an armed conflict with China. The Canadian government has sent warships and also fighter jets to challenge Chinese sovereignty over the Strait of Taiwan. And as a Canadian citizen, I find that it's completely ridiculous that our government is on the other side of the world doing these provocative actions, at times with CBC journalists on board who try and portray the fact that these ships and planes are being intercepted by Chinese planes and ships as somehow extremely aggressive. What is Canada doing on the other side of the world challenging Chinese sovereignty? So with all of this hysteria that we see around anti-Chinese racism and the impact on Canadian politics, the federal parliament last year adopted unanimously a bill about the Foreign Agents Registry Act, which basically says that anybody who is associated with somebody that's part of a foreign government and they are involved in Canadian politics could face up to a life sentence in jail for not disclosing the fact that they are associated with somebody. And of course, the word association is something that's very ambiguous, that's difficult to define. And it targets particularly Chinese Canadians because the government of China plays such a large role in Chinese society that a lot of people have, family and friendship ties to people who work for the Chinese government. So it's one thing to have, such a registry for people who are lobbying on behalf of a foreign government or who are paid to do so, but using the language associated with is highly problematic. And on my podcast, I had interviewed a Canadian senator, Senator Wu, who's one of the most outspoken critics about this Foreign Agents Registry Act. And he told me that, this bill is the modern exclusion act when it comes to Chinese Canadians. And it's about vilifying the participation of Canadian citizens of Chinese descent in Canadian elections. And if you look around at, the representation of the Chinese community within Canadian politics, there's almost nobody that's from mainland China. There's people from Hong Kong and Taiwan, but people from mainland China who don't have exclusively negative things to say about the Chinese government are basically, pushed out of Canadian politics. And so I think that that is a big problem, and it's really scary that our government has adopted these really draconian laws that are not enforced yet because the commissioner of the Foreign Agents Registry has not been named and the more specific rules have not been published yet. But it is still a law that's on the books that modified the criminal code. And it's worth noting also that in the 2000s, there was a campaign by Chinese Canadians, including William Deere, who I also interviewed on my podcast, the author of a book called Being Chinese in Canada. And people were able to mobilize to get the Harper government to apologize to the Chinese Canadian community for the racism associated with the head tax and with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And some reparations were even paid. So it shows the depth of this historic anti-Chinese racism that we have in Canada. There was a move to build better relations with China at one point, but over the past few years, we've really slid into a highly confrontational approach, both militarily and politically. And so for a long time, I had been very interested in visiting China. I mean, China is a highly developed society. It's one of Canada's largest trading partners. And it's made huge progress in terms of technology and innovation. China was excluded from the International Space Station, for example, and so now they have their own space station. Within a few years, the International Space Station will be coming down. It's reaching the end of its lifespan, and it's unlikely that Canada, the United States, will have a space station up immediately after that. There's also the International Lunar Station for the surface of the moon, which is being pushed forward by China and countries from the BRICS alliance. So there's really a lot of big innovation. They've managed to really bring down the cost of small electric vehicles. In Canada, there's no small electric vehicle on the market. The only electric vehicles we have are large sedans and SUVs. And so I wanted to get a feel for some of this technological progress that had been undertaken by China, especially given the fact that Canada had applied 100% tariffs to both Chinese electric vehicles and Chinese solar panels. So in other words, Canada is willing to slow down our energy transition for political reasons. This spring, I received an invitation from the Chinese embassy in Ottawa, and they told me that they were organizing a trip to China for Canadian journalists, media personalities, and influencers. And this is a trip that was fully funded by the Chinese government. So they covered all of the meals, the flights, the transport within China, and so on. And I've been very transparent about this from the beginning. In fact, I put it as the first paragraph in my post announcing the trip. And I find it's important to reiterate that today in the interest of transparency. And of course, going on a trip that's organized and sponsored by the Chinese government, of course, the goal of this trip was to showcase Chinese achievements and progress, and to really get also a more profound understanding of the Canada-China relationship. And so I don't pretend to have a holistic understanding of the entire country of 1.4 billion people after a 6-day tour organized by the government. And then I also traveled for about a week afterwards on my own and was able to talk with some locals and visit the Yellow Mountains, which is really an incredible landscape. And I spent some time in Shanghai as well, which is the world's third largest city. And it's also the largest and richest city in China itself. So I've got a few photos that I'd like to share just while I go through uh, my trip to China in chronological order. So I guess that people can see it here. So this is when I was leaving at the airport in Montreal. This one is arriving in Beijing. It's a very modern kind of airport. This is a view from the hotel room in Beijing. And the first day of our trip was really by far the most interesting on the political front because we went to the capital city of Beijing and we were able to meet with officials from the foreign ministry. Uh, Earlier in the morning, we went to this news outlet and we had a dialogue with some of the people that worked there. One of the things that I found was quite interesting was that Chinese and Canadians, we operate on different social media networks, right? People in China do not have access to Facebook, and generally Canadians are not active on Chinese social networks. So it really leads to somewhat of a divide. And it makes it so that, people from each side can have sort of warped perceptions of what life is like in the opposite country. We also went to check out the Forbidden City, which for a long time was the center of power in China. So it was very interesting to look around there. In the afternoon, they brought us to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So this photo that you see here is the press briefing room. So every day there's a press briefing about foreign affairs. And we were lucky enough to be able to meet with the spokesperson of the Chinese government on foreign affairs. So for me, this was a huge honor to meet somebody who speaks on a daily basis about world affairs on behalf of 1.4 billion people. Really something that is really exceptional. And although our conversations with him were relatively limited, we did get to have conversations like this one over lunch with the Chinese Institute of Foreign Affairs. And the person who received us was a former ambassador to both Greece and Argentina for the Chinese government. We discussed issues including Taiwan and the way that the West is sort of using Taiwan independence to increase tensions with China. This is a meeting that we had again at the Foreign Affairs Ministry. The official we were meeting with, who's shown in the center, he's the Deputy Director for North American and Oceanic Affairs. He spent a lot of his career in Washington, D.C. And during this meeting, we got to touch on many of the hot button issues between China and Canada. For example, I raised the issue of the perception of that a lot of Canadians have towards China, because we're continuously being fed this anti-China narrative through the media. For example, in Quebec, we have two community centers for that cater to the Chinese community, right? So community centers where the people there who work there speak Mandarin and are able to help people who have recently immigrated to Canada to get their paperwork in order and to, enroll their kids in school and take French classes and that sort of thing. Well, out of the blue, the RCMP and CSIS began saying that these community centers were actually, quote unquote, Chinese police stations. And they advanced this without any kind of proof, without obtaining any kind of search warrant. And, really, in my view, defamed the people who were involved in them. Shortly after, they announced suddenly that, well, the Chinese police stations have closed. but the people who were in these community centers were still there, and there's been no charges laid. And, I think that it's one example of many of these, leaks coming out suggesting that China is carrying out these nefarious operations in Canada, but without advancing any kind of proof. And normally in Canadian society, when you make allegations like that, you have to back them up in court, especially for a police force. So we discussed the fact that that's it. The media is pushing this anti-China narrative. I asked him, what's the number one thing that Canada can do to improve relations with China? He said, he replied with a metaphor saying that, if you're buttoning up a jacket and you start with the buttons in the wrong holes, when you get to the top, nothing will line up. They were very upset about the detention of Ming Wanzhou, who was an executive of the Huawei Corporation. A few years back, the Canadian authorities detained her in house arrest for about 3 years on the request of the first Trump administration, who had a frivolous claim about her violating U.S. sanctions towards Iran. This detention was a big source of tension between the two countries. Canada refused to intervene, even though the Minister of the Minister of Justice had the authority all along to cancel the extradition proceedings, but chose not to. So that's something that really took a big dent out of the positive relationship that Canada had with China. Of course, an issue that's somewhat linked to that is the detention of the two Michaels in China. For the longest time, the Canadian government had claimed that, these people were completely innocent and so on. Well, it turns out that once they were liberated and returned, Michael Xavier has launched a lawsuit saying that the Canadian government owes him money because he was indeed passing along sensitive information and was detained for doing so. The Canadian government has settled this lawsuit now, and so it does sort of, collaborate what the Chinese government was saying, is that these people were involved in spying and that sort of thing. But of course, Canada has used their detention to push this anti-China narrative. And even if you look at the travel advisories on the Canadian government website, when you look at China, they talk about things like arbitrary detention and so on for business people, which is really very far removed from the truth. We talked about some other very sensitive issues, including the recent execution of 4 Canadian citizens in China who were accused of drug trafficking. Of course, Canadians are against the death penalty by the vast majority of us. I'm against the death penalty and prefer a non-criminal approach to drug use and harm reduction and so on. It's something that I've advocated for a long time. So we did discuss that issue of those executions, and what the Chinese government said was that the law in China applies to all people in China, not only to Chinese citizens, and that the quantity of drugs that was being imported by these individuals was many times higher than the threshold for the death penalty, and that they had conducted a trial and so on, and that it took, several years for these sentences to be applied because they have to be validated by the Supreme Court before they're applied. So look, it is sad, that people were put to death over drug crimes, but at the same time, it is a question of sovereignty, right? And I think that most Canadians would agree that Canadian drug policy should be set by Canadian laws. And in this case, Chinese drug policy is set by Chinese laws. And as much as we might disagree with the hardline approach to the war on drugs, that is the law in China, and people who go to China are expected to respect the law in China. So it was, quite a frank discussion that touched on many of the sensitive issues. The issue of the Uyghur situation. So for people who don't know, it's the Muslim minority in the Xinjiang province. The United States government has accused China of genocide towards these people. The Canadian government has adopted unanimously a motion condemning China for genocide in this case. The Chinese government says that, this is completely Western propaganda, that it's not the case. I don't pretend to know enough about it to offer an informed opinion on one side or the other, but I do know that although the Canadian Parliament has adopted a motion condemning this alleged genocide, they have not done the same thing for Palestine. And Palestine, there's been, rulings of the ICJ that, point towards this being a genocide. We're seeing every day the bombs falling on children in Palestine. And so the Canadian government seems to not think that that is sufficient to label it a genocide and to impose sanctions. However, when it comes to China, there appears to be somewhat of a double standard because we do not see the same imagery coming over there. The Chinese government pointed out that the Xinjiang province is open to tourism and encouraged us to go and visit, something that I did not have time to do on this trip. This is another photo of an airport. Within that 6-day trip, we went to 3 different cities. We flew between each one, but I was able to take some high-speed trains later on in the trip, including the maglev train, which is actually the fastest train in the entire world. So Beijing was a relatively quick trip. It was a 24-hour stop over there. And as I mentioned, that was, the essence of the political meetings took place in Beijing. So Hangzhou is a city that's a little bit like San Francisco in the sense that it's very high tech, and they do a lot to attract high tech companies to go there. This is a photo from before. This is at the foreign ministry in Beijing with the foreign affairs spokesperson, and this is our delegation also that you can see here. There's people who are involved in many different things, from an award-winning artist to people who write in the Globe and Mail. There's Aidan Jonah from the Canada Files that's there, and various people. So when we got to Hangzhou, one of the first things we did was they took us to this art exhibition, and it's an art exhibition that features the art from a very popular video game. I forget the name at the moment, but it's a video game that's completely viral within China and across the world. And it's based on a lot of traditional Chinese culture. Here it is. The name is actually Black Myth. So it was interesting to see that. We also got to see the art school that was attached to this museum, and there was people with really exceptional talent that were doing paintings and drawings and that kind of thing. So it's nice to see that China is investing a lot of energy in arts and culture and the preservation of their traditions. This was a kind of high-tech drone company that we went to see. You can see here that this drone is washing windows, and inside we got to take a look at these really huge heavy lift drones that they're manufacturing there. That's a photo of me with one of them. In the evening, we went to see this night market, so we're able to look at some of the tourist attractions. This was the next day at an art museum. So there was a bunch of elementary school kids that were there while we were on this tour, and this is some of them taking a selfie with Donovan, who was a member of our delegation. What was kind of interesting was that there was a lot of these young kids from elementary school that wanted to come up to us and practice their English. And I found out that about 15% of their marks in school are based on their English class. And it struck me that, these kids in China are actually learning more English in school than a lot of kids in French school in Quebec. So it was kind of eye-opening to see that, they've embraced bilingualism over there. And I think that Quebec also, according to Green Party policy, should have about 25% of instruction in a second language, whether that's English or an international language or even an indigenous language. That learning multiple languages is something that's very positive for children, and that's something that China appears to have embraced. We did a little art workshop here at the museum as well. This is us showing the different little paintings that we made based on stencils that were given to us at this art museum. This is another photo of our delegation here in an elevator. So you've got the people from the delegation, as well as some people that were showing us around. We got to eat a lot of different Chinese food. I made really an effort to try almost everything that was put in front of us. So really some very different foods. I tried some jellyfish, for example, some lotus seeds, snails, all kinds of different authentic Chinese food, which I have to say is quite different from the Chinese food that we get at Chinese restaurants in Canada and the United States. This is a photo of an electric vehicle. So we got a chance to go to Geely, which is one of the leading electric vehicle companies in China. And what's really incredible about the Chinese electric vehicles is that they managed to make them so cheap, right? Like you have some electric vehicles starting at $20,000. And this is incredible that they can make them so affordably. And it's also nice that these vehicles are actually quite small, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, within Canada and the United States, we don't have any small electric vehicles on the market. And another thing that I've got some photos a little bit later in the presentation, especially in Shanghai, is that they have very, very large bike paths, which they share with electric scooters of all different sizes of scooters. And so the car traffic is actually quite minimal compared to the bicycle and electric scooter traffic. This same company, Geely, had this drone on display, and there's all kinds of innovation like that. This is a photo of me in this semi truck. They told me that this semi truck that's electric but also has a gas engine can do 600 kilometers on a charge, and that includes towing the trailer. So that's something really incredible. The battery technology in China appears to be quite a bit more advanced compared to the battery technology that's used by the North American auto manufacturers. And I think that even Tesla is really a long way from having a product like this, assuming that it lives up to the technical specifications that they had at this display. This is a photo of us at the Geely dealership with our delegation. These are some of the different models of electric vehicles that they had on display. So they're very modern looking, and really they have a lot more choice of different brands and different models of electric vehicles there compared to here in Canada, where the selection is really quite limited. I noticed also that the cars, you don't really have big SUVs the way that you have here. Like kind of this would be like pretty much the largest SUV you would see. It's what North Americans would call like a crossover, but you don't see big SUVs that are really high off the ground and stuff like that. And really, if people have bigger vehicles, it's because they have a purpose for it, like a transport van or that sort of thing. People don't tend to drive ginormous vehicles for no reason there, like we do in North America. Also, something that was interesting was that they've got a really large proportion of their vehicles that are electric, and you can tell because the license plates are green when it's electric and they're blue when it's gas. In the case of Beijing, they managed to get people to adopt the electric vehicles by essentially making it more convenient, in the sense that if you have a gas vehicle, you have to like win a lottery to be able to drive it downtown. And even then, you're not able to drive it 5 days a week. So even though I guess you could argue that a gas vehicle could be perhaps more convenient and that the electric one places some restrictions. They compensate for that, not through big subsidies the way that we've done in Quebec and Canada, but by saying, well, if it's electric, you can drive it downtown 5 days per week and you don't have to worry about entering the lottery and getting a permit and so on. So it's a way to kind of, counterbalance the convenience of the gas car by offering, perks that are only available for electric cars. So I found that was something quite interesting. This is a park. We went out on a boat tour here in the West Lake in Hangzhou. So really a nice, beautiful place. We got to an island and got off and walked around. And these are the kind of boats, covered boats that people tend to use there. This is a photo with one of our local guides from Hangzhou. So she was involved with the foreign ministry and offices of the foreign ministry in Hangzhou. This here is an interesting little piece of technology. In one of the hotels that we were staying with, they had this little robot, which basically was used to bring stuff from the reception to people's rooms. So it would go on its own and take the elevator and bring people their stuff. Anyway, just kind of an interesting little piece of technology. Okay, here's something very similar. This is a super high-tech port. Okay, this port is fully automated. So you can see that these vehicles that transport the containers have no driver. And they're going to these loading stations, which are also fully automated. So they have artificial intelligence that determines the order for which things should be loaded onto the ships or removed from them, and where they should go and so on. So it's pretty incredible to see this whole thing with all of these vehicles operating without any operators, controlling these individual things. Apparently at night, this whole thing continues working and there isn't even lights that are required for it. The whole thing kind of happens on its own. So that's quite interesting. And this is one of the biggest ports in the world. They've got this section that's automated, and they also have an older section which is not automated. And they said that they were not replacing the old section because essentially it's already built. And you do save some labor with this automation, but not really that much, I guess, compared to the cost to build it. But it is interesting that they're able to have this kind of technology. Also, on the issue of self-driving cars, they're not really that common in China at the moment. Actually, that's one of the things that the United States is sort of leading the way. Back in last fall, I was down in San Francisco and I was able to try out a self-driving electric taxi. So basically it's the Google self-driving car project, and you can call them on your iPhone and they literally come pick you up without a driver and take you where you need to go. So that's one thing that China has yet to catch up on, but is probably coming pretty soon. This is one of our guides also from this port. By the way, this port is located in Qingdao, which is a former German colony. This again is our group here, and what's kind of interesting here is that we're standing on these tiles here, and they're actually tiles that walk on it, your feet sort of sink a little bit, and it generates electricity by recouping energy from people walking. This is a photo that I took at night. At nighttime, a lot of the things are really bright lit, kind of like a little bit brighter than the stuff that we see in Canada. So there appears to be, abundant lighting and abundant electricity. I know that China is really involved with nuclear energy, so obviously there's a lot of pros and cons to that, but they do seem to have abundant electricity to be used. This is a high-tech appliance company that and there's this robot that I took a photo of. One of the things that was interesting with this company is that I discovered they had a refrigerator that had a feature essentially that the fruits and vegetable drawer was vacuumed. So it removes the oxygen from the fruits and vegetables, which actually allows them to last 3 or 4 times longer than when they're in the open air. So it seems to me like a lot more fridges should have such a technology because it could really make a big dent in combating food waste. Later on, we went to this beer tasting with the Qingdao. So that's one of the Chinese brands that some people recognize from North America. And this was a kind of funny thing. They're a drunken house. Basically, you go in there and it's everything is on an angle, so it kind of feels like you're drunk in this thing. So these are some of our guides going through this drunk house, but don't worry, nobody was actually drunk. This is another one of the meals we had with our delegation. These are some of the people. That's Naomi, who's a well-known artist, and Yang, who is the person who organized the trip from the embassy in Ottawa. This is when I got to Shanghai. So these are some of the tallest buildings in the world. This was my solo part of the trip. So for the first couple nights that I was in Shanghai, I wanted to stay in the building on the left. It's one of the tallest hotels in the world, and I really got an excellent view from there and a perspective of the city. This is Shanghai at night, so you can see really this incredible skyline with all these lights going on, and there was literally thousands of people that were there to look at this. It's another shot of one of those tall buildings. Another shot of Shanghai at night. That's me in front of those large buildings. This is the inside of the hotel that I was staying at that night. So I was staying on the 78th floor, and I think it goes up to about 90. And this is like the interior atrium that spans like over 50 floors. That's another shot of the buildings from outside. That's a shot of the view that I had for those 2 nights. Really the third biggest city in the world, so really incredible. After that, I went out to the Yellow Mountains. So it's a mountain range that I got to by train, high-speed train, rolling at about 200 kilometers an hour. And they have a really beautiful landscape there. It's a World Heritage Site. And I went up there on what I didn't realize was a vacation week for Chinese, kind of like a spring break. They called it Golden Week. So I was really lucky to be able to get a ticket to go up the mountain because it was sold out, and I hadn't really done that much research ahead of time. But I managed to show up at the mountain's base at 5 a.m. and was lucky enough to get a ticket to go up. But the mountain was really packed. There was thousands and thousands of people that were up there, almost all of them Chinese. Actually, like I was one of the only white people on the mountain, and 5 different times people stopped me to take selfies with me. So it's kind of funny because I guess China's maybe not as diverse as Canada. So there's not really like as much mixing, I guess, in certain regions. So people were kind of surprised to see a foreigner, I guess, that was there. But it's a really incredible landscape, and it's nice also to have that sort of mixing, right? And some people would say, oh, well, people want to take a photo with you just because of your race. Well, it's really nice actually because it's the complete opposite of people being like, oh, well, you're not welcome here or something like that. The fact that people want to come and take a photo and smile and make that peace sign, I think is actually really, really refreshing. And I did enjoy it. This is some of the food. There's a lot of ramens and noodle soup and stuff like that. And, outside the cities, it's really affordable. A meal like this was about $3, I think, that I paid for it. This is a shot from the train when I was heading back from the mountains towards Shanghai. So you can see a bit of the countryside, the agriculture, and this high-speed train that runs throughout the country. It's incredible that in Canada we don't have this kind of infrastructure, right? Like the via trains that we have do not have a dedicated set of tracks. So they're often waiting for freight trains. They don't really run above 120 kilometers an hour. And it's really a substandard service that is very expensive and that, often makes taking a car more affordable. So Canada is definitely far behind China when it comes to issues of mass transport. This was when I was back in Shanghai again, because I returned after the trip to the mountains. So you can kind of get a bit of perspective here as to what the skyline is like at night. This is just, some crowds here. If you want to see what, what this looks like at night with all these people going around. And one thing that was interesting is that there was, quite a bit of police presence at these places. But one thing that was refreshing is that the police were not armed. So contrary to Canada, where even the police doing crowd control are heavily armed with handguns, it did not seem to be the case in Shanghai. You have some officers here that were doing crowd control. In Shanghai, there was literally so many people in certain streets like this one. If you notice, the people on the left are walking in one direction and the people on the right are walking the other direction. So if you're going the wrong way, they'll tell you, you have to switch lanes kind of. So it's just to get a bit of a perspective on how massive these things are and how many people there are. This is a picture of some public bicycles. And I have to say that this is one of the things that China does much better than Canada. Okay, in Canada, we've got some shared bicycles, but they often have these giant docking stations, which really make them take up a lot more space. And the prices to use them in Canada are often very, very high. To the point that a lot of people don't use them because of the price. But here they've got these ultra lightweight bicycles. And for example, they're really made to last, right? And anybody can use these. It's like just a few pennies to, you can use these things for 25, 50 cents type of thing. So the money is really not a factor to stop people from using them. And they don't require docking stations. They can be left anywhere on the street. And another interesting fact is that the tires are not inflatable. They're just solid rubber. So it really reduces the maintenance costs quite a bit. And it makes at least the Bixie system that we have in Montreal look really inferior. Here are some other shots of them. So you get an idea of just how many there are. They're absolutely everywhere that you go in the city of Shanghai. And I wish we could have something like this in Montreal and across Canada, because it would really be great. So here are the tires. You can see that they're not inflatable tires. So I found that interesting. There's some more shots of them there. These are typical electric vehicles that you see on the road or on sort of the bike path. In Quebec here, the government banned the use of small electric scooters that do not have a serial number and that sort of thing. So I think it's unfortunate, right? Because I do understand as a cyclist myself, like sometimes you're on a bike path and people have these, electric scooters that are very large and go very fast. But if you notice here, you can see in the background, there's this sort of bike path with somebody on a scooter in it. Well, they've got one bike path in one direction on one side of the road. And on the other side of the road, there's a bike path that's also wide like that, but that's going in the opposite direction. So it makes it a lot easier for people to get around. And really, there's no reason why in Canada these vehicles are illegal. Look, this vehicle can fit 3 people in it. You've got the driver and then you've got the bench in the back, which can hold 2 people. So there's no reason why in Montreal, for example, if you order takeout food, that they drive it to you in a full-size car. We should really start looking more at using these different small vehicles like this. Like this one's even equipped for the rain with a windshield wiper. There's so much opportunity for reducing emissions through the use of small electric vehicles like this, which do not have these massive battery packs that have, all of the environmental problems associated with that. We need to really liberalize the use of electric vehicles on our streets. This here is a shot from the subway system in Shanghai. So you can kind of get an idea for how big this is. This subway station has 20 different entrances, and the city has 18 different subway lines. So it's really incredible. The trains are much longer than I've seen in Canada. Everything is easy to get around. Like the exits are numbered 1 through 20, and it kind of feels like an airport when you're going in there. These are some electric buses that they have. So they're pretty much all of their buses are electric. You got the different models of them here. Another small electric vehicle. And this is a pilgrimage that I took to the first Congress, the location of the first Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And so they've got a whole museum set up there, and it's really interesting to learn about, the history of the Chinese Communist Party, which, came to power through mobilizing through unions and through advocating for better working conditions. And they've managed to accomplish a lot in China since their founding just over 100 years ago. So these are some shots from inside the museum, and it's sort of in chronological order, and it ends with Xi Jinping and the different projects that they have in terms of environmental and social sustainability that they're pushing forward in China. This is another example of a small electric vehicle. This is a street cleaner. So you can see the brushes there, and it's got a big vacuum in the back. Again, something I think that would be really useful to have here in Canada. This is another shot of some mobility here. So again, you see the bike path on the left. You've got bicycles and electric scooters together, but they have sufficient space to be able to operate safely, and they're only in one direction. If this was Montreal, you'd have a bike path like that, but with bikes going in both directions, which leads to head-on collisions and that sort of thing. So really, especially in a context where people like Doug Ford are saying, well, we have to get rid of bike paths and so on. Those bike paths, you can increase their utilization if you allow the electric vehicles, like those three-wheeled vehicles and so on, to use the bike paths. Well, then you can really make better use of them, and it gives a reason to be able to expand them even further. If you reserve them for only bikes and you make the electric vehicles illegal, well, certainly the space won't be used as efficiently, and they become more of a target for right-wing parties and politicians that want to get rid of them and make more space for full-size cars and SUVs. This is, again, a shot of even more bikes. You get an idea for, just how many there are at pretty much every street corner. So the scale of this is quite incredible. Okay, this is a neighborhood that I visited that was a little bit more run down. It was near the Shanghai textile market. So that's it. You can see that, I don't know if people are living in all of these buildings, but one thing that was interesting is that right next to these rundown buildings, you had buildings that look similar to them, which are being completely refurbished. So although there appears to be some people living in some rundown buildings, it would seem on the surface that the refurbishment is right around the corner. This is another example of one of these small electric vehicles with a tent around it to be used in the rain. This is a small one used, for utility, for transporting things around the city. And really, I think that this would be incredibly useful for a lot of different cities in Canada. And I don't understand why our governments have not enabled us to use these kind of things on the street legally. Another example here, another one there. People also have these things that they put over the handlebars so they can use them even in the colder weather. That's another example. Okay, so now we're getting towards the end. This is the high-speed train that I took to get back to the airport in Shanghai. So essentially, this is the fastest train in the world. It has been tested at up to 460 kilometers per hour. It's magnetic levitation. So when they switch the train on, it literally picks up and floats on top of the rails. When I was on it, they were operating it at 300 kilometers an hour. So it took, I think, 7 minutes to get from the subway system to the international airport. And although it goes a little bit faster, I hear that they don't use it at full speed because it's a little bit less efficient in terms of energy consumption, and it wears out the train and the tracks a little bit quicker. But for the moment, this is the fastest train in the world, and within the coming years, Japan is going to be unveiling a train that's, I believe, tested up to 600 kilometers an hour. And the track for that train will be quite a bit longer. This track is only about 30 kilometers long. So it's kind of a demonstration project, but it is up and running, and anybody can use it for a ticket. I think the ticket for this was like less than $5. But it was really an incredible experience to be able to ride the fastest train in the world. And I think that, just as the Chinese immigrants built the Canadian railway, I think that, Canada would have a lot to gain by working with Chinese companies to develop high speed or ultra high speed rail within Canada. If you think about it, a train that would roll at 450 kilometers an hour could get back and forth from downtown Toronto and Montreal in less than an hour and a half, which would completely knock out the airline industry for that connection. And of course, this is an electric train. The emissions would be greatly reduced. So Canada needs to move forward with these, high-speed electric train projects. The use of airplanes to get between small distances like Montreal and Toronto is absolutely horrible for the climate. And there's no reason that we can't achieve this in Canada. It's just a question of vision. And I think that that's one of the things that Canada could work with China to improve in terms of environment. That's another photo of that maglev train coming in to the station. You can see that the tracks are very different from a traditional train. This is, I think, one of the last photos in the slideshow, but basically this is in Vancouver on the way back. So you see they've got this concept of public bicycles, but they have these docking stations, which are completely useless. Like, there's absolutely no reason to have this docking station. Look how much space it takes up, They're able to fit such a smaller number of these bikes when using these giant docking stations, which serve absolutely no purpose. So I think that Canada also should, take an example from the Chinese system of having these affordable, basic public bikes that are available on pretty much every street corner, and that don't need to have these expensive and elaborate docking stations. So that's the end of the slideshow. I think, Brendan, if you could put an end to the screen share, that would be great. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Well, thank you so very much, Alex. That was a wonderful presentation. It was amazingly comprehensive. It was illustrated, something of a multimedia presentation. I spent a week in China last year, about this time of year, on a tour. I could have made a presentation just on the restaurants alone as well. Yeah. You probably know that. As soon as you step into that airport, it's like stepping into the future. And I'm sure we have a U.S. administration right now that wants to prevent all that from happening. And there's a lot that can be said about that. We have a lot of interesting questions. Right now, I would just point out their sponsoring organization, and the main organization bringing you today's event is the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. There are some costs involved. We incur some costs with the yearly Zoom membership, with advertising, flyering, posters, and upgrading to webinars for events like this and such. So if there's anything people can do to help, if you want to contribute to help make webinars and events of a similar nature possible, you can find the information for donating to the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War on the website, which is hamiltoncoalitiontostopthewar.ca. There's a donate button. Thanks for all that. We're going to be starting the question period. Let me go over to our Q&A box here. Yes, we have questions in the Q&A box, and we have questions that have come from the chat. So we have quite a lot of interesting questions. We hope to get to as many of them as possible today. I see one here from Farouk. It says, "Thanks for sharing, Alex. How can the Green Party of Canada, and more generally other parties, facilitate better relations with China? So that's the question.
Yeah, well, I think that the Green Party of Canada, if people have followed my social media, I've been really a vocal critic of their slide towards militarism and the politics of fear and wanting to increase military spending, and really joining in with the anti-China narrative of perceiving China as a threat, of saying that we need to pass more laws against foreign interference. Actually, Elizabeth May had said that we should put off the election so that the parliament could reconvene to pass more rules about Chinese foreign interference, when, unfortunately, the Green Party supported this change to the criminal code with the life sentences for people who are associated with people who are working for a foreign minister. So I think that the role of the Green Party, and the way I see it, at least, and the way the Green Party of Quebec sees it, is that we are there to push the debate further. The role of the Green Party is not to play into the dominant establishment narrative, to make people fear other countries, to manufacture their consent for warfare and confrontation. There's absolutely no reason that Canada should be out in the Taiwan Strait challenging Chinese sovereignty. And, people like Eve Engler have said that, this whole narrative about Chinese interference is just a way to build consent amongst the Canadian population for an eventual military confrontation with China. China has not been involved in a military conflict for over 45 years. I think that's something that a lot of Canadians are not aware of. And, we're being fed this anti-China narrative. So the number one thing that the Green Party of Canada could do would be to join with the Green Party of Quebec in speaking out against the anti-China narrative and against this drive to increased military tensions, not just with China, but with Russia and with other countries. Elizabeth May recently suggested that since Trump is sort of pulling back from, U.S. global domination, that Canada should step in and fill at least part of the US's traditional role of being the global cop. So when it comes to foreign policy, I think that the Green Party of Canada needs to do a complete 180-degree turn and stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution.
Well, thanks very much, Alex. That's a great answer. And thanks to everyone who's submitting such great questions. We're getting them both in the Q&A box as well as in the comments section, and those are being forwarded to me. I'll try to read them in some kind of chronological order or something approximating that. There's actually been two questions, the same question posted twice by somebody calling themselves Noah Body. And that question is, why don't they need docking stations for the bikes in China?
Well, a few years ago in Montreal, we had Uber Jump. So these were like electric bikes that were available through the Uber app. And it was the same thing with them. They didn't have any docking stations to go with that. So really, I don't see why we needed the docking stations. Like, some people could say that if you don't have them, that people would just pile them up anywhere on the street, kind of like we saw from the pictures in China. But I think that's okay, And if anything, if there's employees of the bike program, well, they can come and sort of place them a little bit. And I think that it really, if you, educate the public on maybe, not leaving them lying in the middle of the sidewalk in a high traffic area, that, 99% of the people will comply with that. And I don't think that it was a problem when we had those Uber Jump bicycles. So the docking station, I think, is just a way that ends up increasing the cost for the users, and really just slows down the entire process. Like, we need to make this as simple as possible, as accessible as possible. Those bikes, like, they have like a little locking system on it that's battery powered. So when you scan the QR code with your phone, it, I guess, unlocks the back wheel. But it's really a simple mechanism. So that little tiny battery powered box can replace the entire docking station.
Right. Well, that's quite a detailed answer. Thanks. You must have really noticed a lot with regard to the bikes and related technology on your visit to China. There is actually a number of related questions about environmental technology and bicycles and automation. I'm going to read you one of them, and then I'll get to some of the more political questions. But there's a related question here from Evelyn. It says, how are they going to tackle the lack of jobs due to robots?
Hmm. Well, that's it. There's more and more automation, right? I mean, China has access to a huge amount of labor, right? Like it's 35 times the population of Canada. And that's one of the reasons that they've become so sophisticated in manufacturing is that they have, people available and willing to work. So, I mean, I'm not sure how, the automation is impacting that workforce, but I would think that with the automation of certain jobs, that they will put people towards doing new jobs, new projects, and stuff like that. And regardless of automation, like for example in the port, where they don't have crane operators or drivers of the vehicles that move those things around. Sure, there's like a few dozen jobs or a few hundred jobs maybe that are freed up by that. But I think those people can be put to work elsewhere, right? Just like when it comes to Canada, when I've talked about shutting down the tar sands and shutting down the weapons manufacturers and the car industry as well, greatly reducing it. Uh, those people can be given a job guarantee in the energy transition, in restoring wetlands and environmental conservation projects and so on. They can be given the option to be paid to go back to school to retrain. So I'm sure that, China will find, valuable and meaningful work to do for the jobs that are lost to automation.
Thanks very much, Alex. There are other questions about environmental technology, but let's see. Here's a critical question from Louise. She asks, what about all the controls exercised on its population by the government, the corruption? Sorry, but some of the report feels naive. The number of population in Canada versus that of China explains the apparent lack of production efficiency.
Right. Well, I mean, look, I don't pretend to have a holistic picture of China, right? One of the differences is that, in a democratic country like Canada, you have like competing visions of what the future should look like, right? There's a certain polarization in the society that comes from that. So you have, every 4 years putting into question of the direction that the country has taken, and you have sometimes people proposing really radical alternatives. You have people that get into power and want to dismantle the progress made from the previous administration. China is a little bit different. Like everybody seems to be working sort of in the same direction. And, these are two completely different systems, right? And each one has their advantages and disadvantages. And I really don't know enough about China to provide, a holistic understanding of the way that their political system works. But the sense that I have of it so far is that if people have ideas as to how the country could do something better, there is mechanisms to have those point of views heard. And the good ideas that come from the population generally end up becoming policy. But of course, it is different in terms of people's ability to, come out and be openly critical of the government and that sort of thing. But they're two different systems with different values in different countries, and each one has its advantages and disadvantages.
Well, thanks for that very considered answer, Alex. On the question of roboticization or automation, I would just say that China is not Mexico in the sense, the Mexico of 1990, let's say, where there's a lot of human labor to produce every product. There's a great deal of automation in the factories. They have, so-called dark factories that can operate pretty much without people, and it has a very high level of robots per capita in industry now, which they're now working with other countries like Mexico to increase their level of automated production as well. So it's not just that China can throw 1 billion people at production of something. Rather, they're using more automated and mechanized methods for producing things. Here's a short question. Didn't really come up in the presentation, but Ruth asked, Did the Chinese mention their mega project to launch 1 kilometer wide solar farm into space?
No, it didn't. It didn't come up. But a lot of those things are very interesting, right? And I've heard a bit about that solar technology, where essentially you could go into space and put like mirrors and bounce solar energy into solar panels that are located on the Earth's surface, and you'd really be able to harness a lot of energy through that. And there's some really interesting projects like that. I've also heard that in terms of nuclear reactors, that they've managed to develop a like a salt-based nuclear reactor, which doesn't use uranium as a fuel. Might potentially be a lot safer. There's also some reforestation projects in the desert. Like they've managed to, reforest an area apparently the size of Germany. So there's a lot of really like high tech projects like that, and there's a lot of really advanced research into green technology, and they've come a really long way. Like a lot of people would think that cities like Beijing or Shanghai would be full of pollution and have very low air quality. Actually, the air quality was pretty good. It was comparable to what we have here in Montreal, where I live right next to Highway 15, and there's often smog here. I mean, there's some smog in China as well, but generally, while I was there, like the air quality was not a problem that I noticed on a regular basis.
Things have changed a lot in China, even since 2010, 2008. It's like a year in China is 5 or 10 years. There's a lot of other questions about technology related to the environment, and I'll get back to some of those early questions. There's an interesting question about your tour itself from Ian. He says, I went on a similar trip in 2016 and 2019. Glad to see more Canadians visiting China. Did you receive any questions or get a chance to talk about Canada? I actually really enjoyed hearing the opinions of my Chinese hosts when telling them about local Alberta politics.
Yeah, definitely. We got to talking about Quebec and Canadian politics. Really, we were together for over 6 days, right? So there's a lot of different subjects that came up. We did stuff like compared, for example, drug policy between Canada and China, right? And a lot of people there were surprised to hear that Canada has this huge fentanyl problem, that we have tent cities in every major Canadian city, that we have people injecting themselves with drugs and in open sight and passing out on the street and dying and that sort of thing. Over there it's a completely different system, right? They don't tolerate drug use, and the entire time I was there, I didn't see any homeless people or any people that looked like they were in extreme poverty. However, I wouldn't say that poverty does not exist in China, right? I'm sure that there are people living in difficult conditions, that are working long hours and that sort of thing. But it's not as visible as it is here in Canada, where, everywhere you go, basically in a big city, you see some tents set up in parks and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's certain things that are different. We talked a bit about Quebec independence, for example. We talked about the election, right? Like the Canadian election was happening while I was out there, so I was watching the results from my room in Shanghai, and people from the trip had, various political allegiances within Canada, right? It wasn't all eco-socialists, right? There was a diversity of opinions amongst the group. We talked about how people here care for older people, and what kind of government services are like, what the social safety net is, how it compares to what's in place in China. So really, there was a lot of interesting discussions about that. I told them about the way that Canada treats Indigenous people, and the really extreme poverty that we have in those communities. I talked to them about the way that Canada is trying to marginalize Indigenous communities, trying to make sure that young Indigenous people don't become lawyers and start exercising their constitutional rights to land and resources and all these factors that contribute to what we know is the Canadian genocide. So there was a lot of very interesting conversations about that, and it was really a nice opportunity to have this cultural exchange and to for them to get our perspective on some of the things they were showing us, and for us to get their perspective on some of the issues and problems that we have in Canada.
Thanks, Alex. Speaking of genocide, there were a couple of questions about Palestine, and I'll lump them together. Basically, China has been working in the past 18 months to try and bring about a peaceful solution in Palestine. But the questions are, given that China has relations with Israel, what is being done? Did you get any sense on the ground there of what people think about the situation and if what their government might be doing about it?
Right. So I think one of the big differences between, let's say, Canada, the United States, and China is that Canada and the United States actively support Israel, right? And it's our weapons that are being used to carry out that genocide. China is more of a neutral party to that conflict. For them, the respect of sovereignty is very important. But I did not see any Palestinian flags in the streets or really anywhere that I went. It wasn't an issue that was really featured prominently. We did have some discussions with our hosts about the situation, and China wants to have peace in the world as much as possible, but it wasn't really a focal point of the discussions that we had.
What about political issues internal to China? There was a question from Douglas who asked, how were your questions about the Tibetans, Uyghurs, and the residents of Hong Kong received?
Well, there was very open discussions about those issues, right? So, of course, like when it comes to the Taiwan issue, I've been very outspoken for a long time about the fact that Canada should not be intervening there. Our official policy of the Canadian government is one China, therefore recognizing Taiwan as part of China. I think that Canada trying to upset that balance of power and trying to challenge Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan is a huge problem. And I voiced that. With respect to the Uyghur issue, as I mentioned before, they said that basically this situation is not what the United States makes it out to be. And there is that question of why is Canada condemning this alleged genocide in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs when we refuse to condemn the one that's taking place in Palestine, right? So with the Uyghur issue, they invited us to visit Xinjiang. They said that it's open to tourism, that anybody can go there. They pointed out that the Uyghur population has greatly expanded over the last couple of decades, and that's it. So that's the way that those conversations went. And I think that they did raise a lot of very interesting points around that. And there is an anti-China narrative, right? Like when you watch Canadian or American news, it's often trying to vilify the Chinese. And so, like, I don't pretend to have like the answers to, these conflicts and what the situation is. I haven't been there. It wasn't part of this trip. But I do find it, somewhat suspect that the United States government is the one that's advocating most vocally on this issue of the Uyghur population. And so I think that the U.S. line does need to be second guessed on that issue.
It's certainly an interesting topic to investigate for the future. And there's probably more interesting political questions. There's some about technology that I've been holding on to, technology and trade. There's a gentleman in the audience named Chris who asked a series of questions about trade. He said, I'll try to read quickly. Was information provided for key trade shows and conferences that take place annually? Because Canadians need to have clear access to methods of attendance to such events for buying things like buses, shuttle buses, cars, mini cars, trains, wind tech, wave, and solar panels. So, where do you find information about these trade shows, or did they give you any? And how do Canadian young academics study in China? How could they best do that to learn about that technology and logistics in the Chinese language?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of translation tools that are available, right? So it's possible to go to websites and translate them into English. They didn't give us any particular information about upcoming trade shows and that kind of thing, but I would encourage people to look this up and to go, right? It's not that difficult to get to China. You do have to apply for a visa. It takes 7 days to get it. You know, you submit your passport at the either at the consulate or the visa center or the embassy, depending on where you live. And China is open to Canadians, right? It is definitely possible to go there. There's a lot of people that go there for business and that sort of thing. So despite what people might think, it is possible, and there are daily flights on Air Canada between Beijing and Vancouver. There's a number of airlines that are operating, so it is quite possible to go. And actually, just recently, I checked, what the cost is. And I think a flight between Montreal and Vancouver is like $800 per direction. So it is within reach. And I think that more people from Canada should visit China and get a more realistic perspective of what things are actually like on the ground there, rather than just kind of getting our opinions through the news, which are overwhelmingly sensational and negative when it comes to China.
Well, thanks, Alex. That's a very detailed answer. And Chris, or the gentleman, yeah, Chris just thanked you for that. And yeah, we still have a few questions. I know we're getting towards the end of things, but there's still most people here and a few good questions left. So I'm going to try to handle as many as I can here. Yuri Smouter asked a politically rich question here. He said, question to Alex, as an eco-socialist, do you find China is sincerely trying to pursue its own eco-socialism with Chinese characteristics? Do you find that they are guilty of some greenwashing, or are they a nation trying sincerely to deal with the climate crisis? And as someone who's going to be accused of being a tankie, please explain, do you find like China guilty of settler colonialism and so on, the way that Canada behaves and other settler colonial nations do?
No, not at all. I think that China is a country that respects international borders, that hasn't been involved in a military conflict for 45 years. And China, when it partners for development, with countries, for example, in Africa, there's a shared ownership over the infrastructure and so on. The same cannot be said about Canada and the United States, right? The United States, when they want to get a resource from a country, they come in, they support armed uprising, they do regime change, they participate in coup d'etat, and they take the resources, right? Just like they're doing with Ukraine now, and forcing them to sign the agreement with the United States about the critical minerals. So I think that, that model of development is not nearly the same as Canada. Like, especially when you look at, what countries has China invaded, right? Basically nowhere, right? In the last, few decades, Canada has been involved in many military operations, right? We invaded Afghanistan. We're participating right now in bombing the Houthis in Yemen because we don't like their support for Palestine. Libya, there's Iraq, even Canada's participated in. So there's a lot of armed settler colonial conflicts that Canada's participated in, far more than China has. And, it's quite incredible given the fact that China has 35 times more population than we do. Then when it comes to eco-socialism and environmentalism, I think that China is sincere. They understand the threat of climate change. They're making efforts to mitigate it. But it's not to say that like everything in China is super green, right? Like, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of excess packaging. Like at one point I ordered a coffee, and the coffee came in a disposable cup with a plastic lid, with a plastic straw, with a cardboard, heat protecting thing, and then the whole thing inside a plastic bag, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that where the packaging is really excessive. And of course, we have the same problems in North America, but I would say that in my experience over there, there was even more packaging. And a lot of the times I find, when I'll order stuff from China online, for example, that the packaging is just completely absurd. So I was hoping that it wouldn't be so bad on that, and there would be more like, deposit exchange programs for cups and things like that, because really they must have so much, uh, plastic waste to deal with. And, unfortunately, we didn't really get to see much about their waste treatment infrastructure on this trip. But I would assume that they're probably more efficient than us here in Canada. Actually, Quebec and a lot of other Canadian provinces, we had been exporting waste to China. So we have all these shipping containers coming from China containing merchandise, and a lot of them are going back empty. So Quebec, for one, started filling them up with garbage or low grade, really low grade recycling. But about 5 years ago, China banned the import of garbage or recycling to China from Canada, and Quebec was forced to find alternatives. But unfortunately, about only 10% of what we put in our recycling bin actually gets recycled here in Montreal. So we've got a huge amount of work to do on that. And, perhaps on a future trip, it would be interesting to see how China is dealing with processing waste, and how to utilize maybe some of the energy that can be recuperated from that.
Thanks, Alex. Great answer. There aren't too many questions left from when you were giving your talk initially. There's a couple there, but David has asked about the Green Party that I should lump together. He asks, first of all, what is the Green Party of Quebec's stance on Gaza and Palestine? And also, what is their opinion on the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Okay, all right. Well, it's a very good question. So, first of all, when it comes to Palestine, we say openly that this is a genocide that's taking place. It's completely unacceptable. We've called for economic sanctions on the entire state of Israel to apply economic and diplomatic pressure to dissuade Israel from continuing to kill all of these innocent people, children that are being wiped out by the tens of thousands. Completely deplorable situation. And I find it very frustrating to have to watch this genocide and to see Canada's continued complacency in it. And, we've been vocal critics of the Green Party of Canada, who we think should go much further in their condemnations. The fact that Elizabeth May refuses to use the word genocide is a huge problem for us. And really hard-hitting economic sanctions are required to hold Israel to account. And we've called for, breaking cooperation deals between Hydro-Quebec, for example, and an Israeli power company and that sort of thing. And I regularly go to protests. I've been involved. At one point, we went down to an arms manufacturing facility that provided landing gear for American fighter jets, and we stopped the workers from getting there for a few hours. I've been involved in some direct actions like that. And actually, back in 2022, I did a tour of the different war factories in Quebec, calling for them to be shut down, and the workers given a job guarantee in the energy transition. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, we've been outspoken since day one, since before even the invasion, condemning NATO's provocation of this proxy war, and condemning, the U.S.-led policy, at least under the Biden administration, of all-out confrontation with Russia. Completely counterproductive, complete waste of human lives, of resources, of money. We should not be contributing to the never-ending cycle of war in the world. World peace is an objective of Green Party of Quebec. It should be an objective of everybody. It's not something that's not realistic, or that's impossible. It's possible if people work towards it. And the first step of that is being able to denounce clearly, without ambiguity, all of these abuses that are taking place in the world. And Canada has a foreign policy that's based on confrontation, escalation, and we have to worry also that this Canadian and US government policy of continuous confrontation will not end well for us. Like we talked on this webinar about all of the manufacturing efficiency in China, for example. If Canada gets into a war with China, like we will not win that war. It's impossible, right? The manufacturing capacity is on their side. The population numbers are on their side. And people who think that Canada can go around and provoke wars with places like Russia and China and get out of it without having any impact here in Canada are completely wrong and mistaken in that. Canada can go into Afghanistan and fight the Taliban and not really have any consequences here on Canadian soil, not really have, life in Canada disrupted by that, even though it was the wrong thing to do. But thinking that, we should work towards a global war, World War III, because, we support Ukrainian sovereignty or we support Taiwan's sovereignty from China. Like these are not things that will end well for Canada. They're wrong to do in the first place, but we're also not equipped to win a confrontation like that. So it's in Canada's best interest to work towards peace on all fronts. One of the things in the last election was that even the Green Party was saying, well, we need to increase military spending. We need to buy F-35s and militarize the Arctic and that kind of thing. I mean, even if you consider that the threat to Canada would be United States annexation, like even if Canada put 20 years of our economy into building up our military, we still would not be able to hold it against the United States. We would still not even be able to compete. Okay, and we still would not have the population. And even if we did try to go to war with the United States, like it would come at an incredible cost to Canada and Canadian lives. So basically, the Canadian military is completely useless. And any increased spending in that is just taking away from social programs. And so under these circumstances, the Canadian government should be working towards peace with all countries in the world, should have world peace listed as a formal and primary objective of all foreign policy. And unfortunately, over the past few years, Canada has become one of the most outlandish, one of the most confrontational and sensationalist voices in global affairs. And I think that it's a disgrace in the entire country, and it puts all of us at risk.
That's very detailed once again. Thanks, Alex. It might actually cover several questions. There were a couple questions that had been asked about Taiwan, war with Taiwan. What should Canada be doing in that regard? I think your points are well taken about China's industrial strength. Certainly, the United States has never picked a fight before with a country that is both larger than the United States and more industrialized than the United States, especially in terms of shipbuilding. And not only that, but technologically and for other reasons, it looks like a really bad idea that some people in the U.S. administration are setting a course on. So thanks for that. There's a couple interesting questions about the environment and the Green Party specifically, and we only have a few minutes left, but there's only a couple questions left. So David had asked, what next steps must the Green movement take to recuperate from its loss this election? What changes need to be made, and how do you intend to change them?
Okay, well, basically, the Green Party of Canada needs a complete revamp. We need to have a group of left-wing people that are willing to put in time over the next few years to really overthrow the current leadership and clean house from top to bottom. I mean, this party has gone so far down the path of militarism, of eco-capitalism. Just this week, people who follow me on social media know that the youth president of the Green Party of Canada was seen as shooting a semi-automatic weapon while leaning on a NATO flag. This is somebody who's been trained by NATO Canada Association and their youth wing. So really the party from basically the top down needs to be completely cleaned out. And, that's work that I'd be interested in contributing to. Like I've put 12 years of my life now into Green Party leadership in Quebec. And I really hope that, some progressive people can get together and take over the Green Party of Canada, because right now it's going in the complete opposite direction of where it should be. And one of the things that's a little bit difficult is that Well, Elizabeth May has, a very strong personal brand and has a large group of loyal followers that, really are not that critical of this radical shift that she's brought in terms of militaristic foreign policy and that kind of thing. So, my hope is that eventually people will get involved and will be able to change the leadership and change the establishment and, bring the party back to its roots of being in support of nonviolence and peace and justice. But at the moment, like the Green Party of Canada is a huge embarrassment to the peace movement and to a lot of people in the Green Party movement, including myself.
Yeah, and the Green Party of Canada is unfortunately in this similar company when you look at many of the European Green parties as well. And there are a lot of discussions happening right now after the current election that just ended about how to revitalize various political parties in Canada and labor movements as well. There's obviously a lot of work that has to be done at the grassroots to have any sort of alternative voices in this country. So it's looking like we're about to wrap up. There's only really one more question, an amusing question, if you have a moment, and it's just about your visit itself. The question is, how can you suggest flying to China to visit it when it has such huge impacts on the climate? And also, did you visit any organic farms? So that's the question.
Yeah, look, the flying aspect obviously emits a lot of emissions. There's not much of a way to get around it, right? Like you can't take a boat to China, you can't take a train. So unfortunately, there was a lot of emissions created by my trip over there, and that's a point that's not lost on me. But I think that given the importance of Canada-China relations and of avoiding any kind of military conflict between the two countries. And also, the fact that Canada can really gain a lot of environmental technology by cooperating with China. I think that those are ways to offset the emissions from my trip out there, but I really wish that there was a more sustainable way to get around the globe. And I've actually avoided a lot of travel in the past, because of the emissions. But at some point, I think that, the other advantages to this trip outweighed the negative consequences associated with the emissions. We didn't really see much agriculture on this trip. It was mostly focused in cities. We did go to a winery at one point. But definitely those are things that I would like to look at on a future trip is, how their agriculture functions, how they manage to feed 1.4 billion people, and, what kind of sustainable agriculture models they've practiced over there. Because I have read that, they have things like industrial farms that are in like high-rise buildings and stuff, where the waste can be concentrated and treated perhaps better than out in fields and that kind of thing. Like here in Quebec, one of the issues we have is that animal agriculture is often located next to freshwater lakes. And of course, the pollution from the animals ends up in our waterways. So I would really be interested to see how China manages to feed so many people. And I think that also the diet there is a little bit less dependent on meat. Like you'd have some meat in dishes, but in smaller proportions to what you see in North America. So that's probably one of the ways that they manage to cope a bit. And I've heard also that they have a target of reducing meat consumption even further. So those are questions that I look forward to answering after a future trip.
All right, Alex. Well, in terms of getting the most from your visit to China, I know you've written some accounts, some brief updates while you were there, and you posted them on social media. And of course, you have a website where you blog these kind of encounters and also make articles. So my question is, if people want to get updates on this or perhaps read some comprehensive write-up of this trip and tour afterwards with photos and such, where can they go to get this information?
I would say the number one place is my Facebook account. People can follow me there. I've got Twitter as well. And I just literally got back yesterday, so it's the first interview I'm doing upon my return. But I'm going to do some other ones, and I'll probably produce a podcast episode as well with different video clips that I took on this trip. And that's it on my Facebook right now. You can look back to, for example, the post that I wrote up after the political meetings and that kind of thing. And there's quite a bit of information available there. If people are interested in support my work, well, first of all, I want to echo Brendan's call to donate to the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, who was nice enough to host this event in collaboration with the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network and Just Peace advocates. And if people are located in Quebec and they have Canadian citizenship, they can donate up to a maximum of $100 per person per year to the Green Party of Quebec. So Green Party of Quebec, other than those small donations, is a completely publicly funded organization. We're funded based on the number of votes we get. And it's one of the things that allows us to speak out on different issues without having to be accountable to a donor base. But it is possible to donate up to $100 to the party for people who live in Quebec.
Well, thanks very much, Alex, and thanks for reminding about the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War fundraising as well. Again, people can visit the website at hamiltoncoalitiontostopthewar.ca. There's a donate section, there's a button, and also they can send an email e-transfer to hcsw@cogeco.ca. So thanks for that. We love doing webinars. We love talking with people who go on interesting trips and tours and meet with people and conferences and so on. So I hope to read more about Alex's trip, in terms of his blog, his personal website, and his social media on Facebook, and of course his YouTube program as well, where he interviews guests and has a studio. It's great. So thanks again. Thank you so much, Alex. And thanks to everyone who came and made this an interesting and fun event. Maybe we'll be able to do more things like this if more people go on interesting tours. Just in terms of the political questions that were asked about Palestine today, I've been asked to make an announcement at the end of this, which is now, concerning pro-Palestine activity in Hamilton. I've just been asked to mention that the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War is going to hold a peaceful protest at the annual Negev dinner in Hamilton on Thursday, May 29th at 5:00 p.m. at the La Una station at 360 James North. That's May 29. The tax-deductible $250 a plate banquet, which is organized by the JNF, the Jewish National Fund of Canada, which recently had its charitable status removed by the Canada Revenue Agency, thanks to the tireless work of many activists, including Jewish activists. This dinner is going to raise funds for the apartheid Israeli regime, which is conducting a genocide in Gaza. So Palestinian solidarity organizations and like-minded groups are welcome to co-sponsor and or endorse the protest. So I imagine this is something to keep up with on the Instagram and Facebook pages of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. So I'm pleased to make that announcement, and I was especially pleased to have Alex here and members of many Canadian peace organizations in the attendees section asking questions. So a video of this will be released later on. We'll put it up on YouTube for everybody that missed it. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for our help from Kevin and Liz, who helped manage the comments, the chats, and the questions coming in. So thanks, Kevin and Liz. And that's great. We'll see you on YouTube, and we'll see you on Alex's blog. So bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.